Hi, and welcome back to Out of the Cloud, where we take technology and telecommunications topics and break them down for the everyday business owner. My name is Coley, and with me today I've got Ed with Compliancy Group. Ed, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
So give me a little bit of background information on you, where you came from, how you got here, and why we are talking about HIPAA compliancy today.
Okay. Well, first and foremost, I'm from New York, as you can tell by my accent. I tell people Charlotte, North Carolina, they don't believe me. But I started out about 20 years ago selling fiber optic networks for hospitals, so I was always kind of around HIPAA. But as we progressed, I moved more into cybersecurity, which is more risk mitigation. Not really having a lot more background in compliance, I wanted to work with a company that's what they did. So came over to Compliancy Group at that point, probably about a little over a year ago.
Okay, that's exciting.
Mm-hmm. Compliance is not exciting to anybody, but I really do love the company. I do love the space, and I love what we're able to do for clients.
Okay, great. Everyone has heard of the concept of HIPAA, but what actually is HIPAA and what does it mean to be HIPAA compliant?
Okay, so what HIPAA really is a pain in the neck for most businesses, to be honest with you. But what it stands for, HIPAA, is Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And what that really means is that it's a law that protects your personal health information, how it's stored, how it's used, how it's moved between companies. So that there are two types of entities that work with HIPAA, or fall under HIPAA, I should say. And one is what we call a covered entity, which is like your doctor or your dentist. So they're taking that information, which is valuable, that protected health information, from you directly. Anybody that uses that, like a IT company or billing company, even an accountant, a lawyer, or what we call a business associate. So those are the two different things that would fall under there. And what the law really does is just make sure that not only that interaction, but everything is covered and that information stays protected.
Okay, and just out of curiosity, how long has HIPAA been around?
It started out in 1996,
Okay.
and then they did kind of a refresher. I don't remember exactly. They added something called High-Tech Subtitle D, and I don't know what that was. I think that was around 2016. I'm not quite sure, to be honest with that.
That makes sense. A lot's changed since 1996. In your job, I'm assuming you tend to ask people if they're HIPAA compliant as an opening conversation, and I'm sure that people do tend to say yes by default, but what does that actually mean to be HIPAA compliant for or from a business standpoint?
All right, so the air quotes compliant, right, we talk about. And we try not to ask somebody directly if they are HIPAA compliant, because the answer you'll get is yes. It's the end of the conversation. You really don't know. So we try to frame the question more like, what are you doing for HIPAA compliance? How are you handling it? And we get all kinds of answers to that question, right? We'll get, I got my cousins doing it. I got this guy. I know a guy, whatever it is. We take those answers and we provide something called the HIPAA checklist. And we say, look, just take a look at this. We want to educate you as to what's needed and make sure you're there. So they look at the checklist, they go through it, and we see kind of these awkward looks, right? These guys like, I don't know, do we have that? Do we have this? And it's a great way for us to begin that conversation. We educate as to what's needed. We have a solution to provide, but more important, we want them to start thinking of it, creating what we call a culture of compliance, to think about that. And that's kind of what we do, and that's how we start that conversation.
Within that checklist, for people who are maybe watching or listening that are starting to question if they're part of what needs to be fully compliant, what are some major bullet points that people definitely need to keep an eye out for?
Yeah, I mean, the law is multifaceted, so it covers quite a bit, and that's kind of where we come in. But there are 6 audits that need to be done every year. There are employee trainings for every employee, has to be done every year. There are reviews of policies that have to be done every year. And then any business associate, as I mentioned earlier, that you're exchanging information with has to have an agreement in place. All those aspects are, there's things underneath each one of those that have to be addressed. So it does become a little cumbersome. And when they look at the checklist, I think they're like, oh my goodness. So.
That's fair. Mm-hmm. At least from my experience, HIPAA tends to be a buzzword for businesses like doctors, medical practices, dentists, things like that. And I'm assuming it's applicable for industries outside of just the medical field. Can you go into that a little bit more and talk about the who's and the whys?
So we look at healthcare as an ecosystem. So you do have your dentists, your optometrists, your doctors, right? They're the covered entities we talked about. But the business associates are people that use that information, right? They use that in the course of doing their business. Lawyers, accountants, and right now, to be honest with you, we're seeing something with attorneys which is very interesting. A lot of law firms have multiple parts of their practice. They do maybe corporate law, they do personal injury or malpractice. The way the law is written, attorneys in general have a way that they don't have to be HIPAA compliant. It's called the shield clause. But what we're finding is cyber insurance companies, if they want to continue their cyber liability insurance, they need to be compliant, because the cyber liability insurance companies are saying, if you're not compliant, we're not going to cover you. So it's a very interesting take, and we're starting to see a lot more attorneys have interest in HIPAA compliance that they never did before.
That makes sense. From the cyber side and from the technology side, are companies like phone system providers or managed service providers or anything like that, do they fall under this umbrella now too? Maybe not as intensely as attorneys, maybe so, but are they part of that wheelhouse as well?
They are, and it depends on what they're doing for the clients, if they're storing data, how they're dealing with it, but even going on to a client's computer and doing, remoting in and doing some work on it, if they have access on the screen to the information, it's what they call accidental exposure. They want to make sure that they're covered for that as well. And the reason being is that this information is valuable to cyber criminals, right? This is the protected health information is as valuable, I think, as financial information, that, your credit cards, your bank statements. But the difference is that large institutions, banks and things, they have large budgets for cybersecurity. Practices and small doctor's offices, and you look at the majority of them, it is considered a small business. They don't have those budgets. So keeping that information protected is key, because it's considered low-hanging fruit for cyber criminals and bad actors out there.
Okay. What are some examples of ways that information that's HIPAA oriented has slipped through the cracks, essentially, whether it's from an individual employee doing something that caused an issue, or a company as a whole from a procedural or any other kind of standpoint?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. So the protected health information that we talk about, there are 18 identifiers that say that something is a protected health information. And then probably what the most, I'm going to say most, but one of the things we see is that something is not identified as protected health information when it is. So the disclosure is not done maliciously, obviously, by an employee, but they release something that maybe they ought not have. So that's one thing. And an example of that, sometimes you would see, like, we all go to the pharmacy and are waiting online to get a script, and the person at the counter says to you, what's your name and birth date? And out loud you say it to them, but you're now disclosing protected health information in a way. So those type of things are things that we try to address, or try to help companies address. Also on the social media, people don't think about it, but you're responding to a review or something, and based on what you respond and how you respond, you could be adding protected health information to the web, which is a glaring way. If it's out there, you're really kind of opening yourself up to audits and regulatory enforcement for something.
What are some ways for various businesses of any kind, based off of the example, that they can either mitigate the risk from, for simple things like the pharmacy or whatever that might be, the social media, or if something has already occurred, they can kind of fix the problem that has already started to snowball?
Gotcha. So fixing it may be a little more complicated, but we can always say that you have a good faith effort in place, right? That you're identifying it, that you're aware of what it is from a company standpoint. Training is very important, making sure your employees know and what to do and how to do and what not to do. We try to create, not just make companies compliant, but create that culture of compliance, which really is people starting to think that way. Is what I'm doing correct? Is this, and then that is one of the best ways. And we do that through our training. We do that through the policies that we help clients implement. But that creating that culture of compliance is really what's going to drive that change. And that ultimately is what the law is trying to do, is trying to get people to think that way, to protect this information.
Without giving away trade secrets, is there kind of any basic practices that people can start to be aware of to get into the mindset more, maybe as they're starting to learn more about it right now, and pick out the red flags that they can start to change their mindset to even help you guys when you start having those conversations with them?
Well, a lot of it is about conversations, right? I think that, employees that are speaking about different things, they just need to be aware of what they're saying and how they're saying it and where they're saying it, right? Those are some common red flags. That's part of the training that we would put in place and help them do that. But the policies and procedures, all the things that we would lay out, kind of just have the company marching in the same direction. And that's ultimately, I don't know if it's a trade secret, but that's what we try to do. And the way we do it is through our software, but also through a coach, a dedicated person to help them along those ways. So those two things are really what drive our solution to making it more customer facing and more, I don't know how to say, friendly, if you want to say it that way, of getting something in place in a way that works for most companies in a simplified manner.
So your company does training and auditing of companies of all different shapes and sizes when it comes to HIPAA compliancy. What are some things that you guys look for? And what are some, without telling us your secrets, things that you do to help them in the short term and or the long term?
That is correct. We deal with a single doctor's office or a multi-site law firm or a multi-state healthcare provider. So we help everybody in that fashion to kind of address what they are doing. And part of it goes back to that culture of compliance again. That's one of the things we try to instill. The two things that we do would be to get clients compliant. And we do have a process that we do that. I don't think it's giving away the secret sauce to say that, but we use a comprehensive software. Maybe this is good to also mention it. When we started back in 2005 as a company, we were on-site consultants. So we went into large institutions because that's where the enforcement was at the time, like United Healthcare, Kaiser Permanente. We were on-site consultants. So we still have that kind of feel when we deal with our clients and help them. And I think that helps, because a lot of what happens when it comes to these compliance things, I mean, we do audits, we do reviews of policies, we create remediation plans to help our clients, and those policies are created based on what we have found. They're not generic policies, which is a key differentiator, as well as we put training in place to do that. So those are some of the key things that we do to help those clients and kind of guide them through with the whole idea of, while we're taking care of making you regulatory compliant, making sure you're okay when it comes to the law, we work with partners to make sure they also have cybersecurity in place so that their risk is mitigated as well, which is also a key component when we work together with somebody. But that overarching theme of a culture of compliance, be it cybersecurity or be it a regulatory compliance, and it really needs to be there. I mean, years ago, we looked at cybersecurity, we looked at compliance as products. I think now we don't look at it as products anymore. It's a stance. It's how does your business look at the world? And I think when we go into what we do, we take that seriously, not only to get them compliant, but also to have that culture of compliance in place so that we can make sure that people understand it and they can kind of take this and own it themselves as well.
We're not just talking about big giant corporations or just the medical field or lawyers or things like that we touched on. This is relevant for the small to medium sized business as well. And can you give us a little bit more information as to why that's important? Because it is, but it might not be something that occurs to the everyday business owner when they've got 5, 10, 25 employees and they're growing and they're doing all of the things and they don't have time to sit there and really contemplate this, or this is the first time it's occurring to them.
Yeah, we certainly get that. We live that. We see the small businesses, and that's really a core of what we do is sometimes single or practices with maybe 10 employees or less, or those businesses that support them, and that is key. Printing companies, billing companies. The idea behind protected health information and its value, I don't think, we try to drive home what that actually means. Your protected health information can be used, to create identity fraud, to do all these other cyber things. It's valuable to cyber criminals. And it's easy to get to if you don't pay attention to it. And unfortunately, I'll give you an example. I've had a business associate, I don't want to mention what type of business it was, but he came to me and he said, I'm okay, I'm good, I don't need HIPAA compliance. And he sent it in an email that it was a Gmail account, which tells you right now you're not encrypting your email. And we understand that some of these things are nuances that a small business doesn't want to go through, but try to get them to understand that protecting this information is protecting the people that work for you, right? It's protecting the individuals that make your business what it is. And that's really kind of where we drive that whole culture of compliance, but protecting that information, because it is relatively easy to get if you don't provide some basic things. And that's really what we strive to do, is strive to understand.
Okay, very nice. Well, thank you so much, Ed, for your time today.
Absolutely, it was truly a pleasure. Thank you.
Perfect. I very much appreciate it. I feel like I've learned something today. Is there anything else that you feel like needs to be added regarding HIPAA compliance, or do you think we pretty much covered it all?
I think we covered it, but I just would tell everybody out there, listen, you don't have to use Compliancy Group, but please figure out and get yourself educated as what you need to do to make sure we protect each other, because that's really what it's about.
Yeah, especially in today's day and age.
That's right.
Well, that's all we have for today. Until next time, my name is Coley, and this is Out of the Cloud.